Joseph, I feel like I'm waddling with an armload of heavy stones out in front of me. I used to be graceful, but look at me staggering out of balance with this huge belly. I used to be pretty. Mary began crying while Joseph struggled for the right thing to say. He'd learned to be very careful with his words when she was like this, so he waited for her to continue. Now my swollen legs look like palm tree trunks, and I'm carrying water around like a camel with his humps. Except these two humps are in front. Joseph was relieved that she was able to joke through her tears, so he spoke. Mary, you're still just as beautiful as the first time you danced for me. You'll be lighter soon and dancing again and swinging our baby around as the three of us dance together. Mary eased into the comforting chair Joseph had created. It's almost time, Joseph. It can't be much longer or I'll explode. Joseph knelt in front of her and removed her sandals to massage her feet. Oh, that feels good. Poor little feet, to have such a big woman riding on top of them all day. Mary closed her eyes and smiled. You're so good to me. Such a good husband, massaging my feet while I relax in this wonderful chair you made to relax my aching back so I could feel better. All under this strong roof in this solid house you made for us. You're such a good man, my dear Joseph, and I love you. He will too. I love you too, Mary. But try to take a nap while I finish the carvings on the cradle. I want you both to be comfortable and safe here in our home. Everything is almost ready for you. He pointed to her belly, nodding his head. Then he hummed a lullaby to them as he carved the last intricate designs into the wood of the cradle. It was a labor of love. As he carved, he pictured the baby's fingers exploring the curves, and his teeth exploring as they began to arrive. He imagined his son's little carvings from his teething, adding to the texture of the design. Her time had almost come. She would be safe here, in this world that he'd made for them. Their baby would be born in as much security as he could provide. And their friends and relatives were nearby. Now they waited for the day this child would choose. It was not to be. The empire had other plans. Far away in Rome, bureaucrats decided they needed a census of the colonies to be able to plan their budgets properly. A date was chosen with the enforcing power of imperial soldiers behind it. Since people moved around in these colonies, everyone would have to return to their ancestors' appointed town, so no one would be missed. Now, no waiting for babies to be born at home. Mary was almost ready to deliver, but it didn't matter. There were no exceptions allowed. Joseph knew what Roman understanding and mercy looked like. So they left the safety of their home and traveled to David's ancient home. Bethlehem was a long journey for a woman ready to give birth. So Joseph made it as easy as he could. He was afraid she would go into labor before they could reach their destination. So they traveled slowly, alone. Mary rode his gentle donkey. Their friends had other destinations required, and their parents were too old and would be represented by the younger members of the family. It was the fourth day of their journey. Mary was brave, but she cried. She cried not so much out of pain, but for fear of the danger to her baby. Joseph wondered why God asked this of them now. Why this unreasonable journey, so dangerous for a pregnant woman? If he was supposed to protect them, why was God making it so difficult? He didn't know all of this was just to get them to Bethlehem to fulfill some obscure prophecy. Don't you care? He looked at the sky. Don't you care about them at all? Where are your angels? Are they too busy doing something more important, like delivering messages? He sighed like the desert wind. I guess it's just you and me, he whispered into the donkey's hairy ear and caressed his sweaty neck. We're the only angels that will get them safely there. Funny, I always thought angels smelled better than we do and weren't so covered in dust. I had hoped it would be easier, that there would be angels. I guess that wouldn't be authentic human life for him. Just two human parents and a donkey loving him, protecting him the way two loving parents do. Angels have their place, and so do we. You'd be surprised if he answered you like Balaam's ass, Mary interrupted his whispered talk with God via the donkey. Really, Joseph, I'd prefer it if you didn't go mad on me out here in the desert, carrying on conversations with donkeys and trees, and leave me to deliver this baby alone. I'm in sort of an awkward situation right now. Have you noticed? Can we stop for a while, please? I'm afraid this little one is being shaken to bits inside of me, and I need to feel something still beneath me for a minute. I'm getting sick to my stomach. I know this dear animal is doing his best. She scratched the donkey behind his ears and gave his head a gentle pat. I think he might enjoy getting my huge belly off his back for a few minutes, too. I know my 2 feet get tired of carrying this weight. Joseph lifted her off the donkey and helped her to the ground. The baby's dropped lower, Joseph, and the bones of my hips have spread apart. Feel how low he is now. Joseph touched her belly and realized there was little time left. He held her close, but as he looked over her shoulder to the sun getting low in the west, he became angry with God and frustrated. Help them. Help us get to a safe place. They could die out here. Is that what all of this has been for? The baby who's changed our lives, stillborn in this desert, and his mother dead behind him. They were still far from Bethlehem, and there were no buildings in sight. Sunset was coming much too soon. They needed to find a place to spend the night. He decided they'd traveled almost as far as he dared. He couldn't let her get more exhausted. Joseph saw a stream in the valley below. Mary, can you ride a little longer? Look down there. We can be there in an hour, safe in the shelter of that valley and trees with plenty of fresh water, if you can just take this a little longer. Mary squeezed his hand. That sounds wonderful to me, Joseph. Just help me back up on this donkey. When they reached the stream, he made the softest bed for her he could, with branches from palms and cedars. While she and the donkey rested, he caught 3 small fish. He made a simple meal and gathered dry wood for a fire to keep back the chill of the evening. Even in the middle of the summer, the desert quickly grew cold at night. The golden sunset faded through the blues into velvet black. The stars watched over them. Joseph saw no angels, just the constant stars. Joseph wanted useful angels. The vivid stars were actually the planets Venus and Jupiter. They'd watched them move closer to each other for weeks until they almost touched now, combining their light. They each were the brightest stars in the sky alone, but now they combined their light. two fiery stars, intimately close and powerful, becoming one. Tonight, they almost vibrated with the narrow distance between them as the atmosphere made them shimmer back and forth between looking like two stars or one. It was a hypnotic effect. Before the moon rose, these two stars were brighter than anything else in the sky. He imagined tomorrow night they would merge. He wondered what would happen then, and what did it mean? He remembered many months ago when they were close together as morning stars. Now they were here as evening stars, after hiding behind the sun for a time. They performed an amazing dance in the sky, back then, just before Mary disappeared for months, when their lives started this incredible journey he never could have imagined. Mary cuddled closer in her sleep, an angelic smile on her face in the blue light of only stars. Dreamless sleep ate their exhaustion. They held each other close for comfort as much as warmth in this lonely valley. He watched her face in the faint blue light that came from only stars and moon, since the fire behind her had burned to glowing coals. He added more wood to the fire to keep her warm. He had warmed her other side. Together, they sheltered the child between them. The baby moved while Mary slept on. Joseph felt him moving, felt this new life. He loved him already. Please wait, Jesus. Please wait until we're safely in Bethlehem. Just rest. You'll have plenty of time to stretch and walk and run soon. If you will just please wait until it's safe. Joseph felt the wetness on his cheek, cool in the night air. He was afraid for them. Joseph rolled on his back for a time, watching the stars. He talked to God. He prayed for their safety. He prayed that this baby would wait until they were safe in a comforting inn with women to help him, women who knew what they were doing. He knew he certainly didn't. He prayed, please, for them over and over until he finally fell asleep. The cry of a wolf woke him. Their two stars had set now, and the moon ruled the sky. He added more wood to the fire. He prayed again until he fell back asleep. At sunrise, they left the valley, and when they climbed the next hill, they first viewed Bethlehem in the blue haze. Mary squeezed his hand with hope now seen. We'll rest safely there tonight, my love, she said. He kissed her on the cheek. He hoped she was right, because he was afraid a sixth day of this would kill her. He prayed this fifth day didn't. It was a long day's journey, but they arrived in time to register their names in the census before the sun went down. The city was crowded. David's children had been fruitful indeed from the crowd of travelers he saw. The 11th commandment of God, and the only one most people faithfully follow, Joseph thought with a chuckle. Be fruitful and multiply. David's city was full. There was not a vacant room in town. After their 7th rejection, Mary's water broke, soaking the donkey's back. Exhausted from the journey and desperate, Joseph begged for his wife. Finally, one innkeeper offered them the only shelter he had left, his stable full of travelers' donkeys and some cattle. The stalls were full, but there was room for them with the stored hay. Joseph was frantic. He knew his wife needed a better place than this to give birth, and she was in labor already. But it was this or no shelter at all. They were alone, and Joseph was afraid. It shattered him to see his love in pain with nothing he could do to help. He had never even watched a baby being born before. That duty belonged to the world of women in Nazareth, and men were always kept away. But they were alone this night. Mary instructed him in what to do, but he was afraid she was dying. Death in childbirth is all too common, he knew. Mary had assisted in a dozen births, and she knew what to do, but she was in pain and full of fear with no experienced woman to help her. She fought against her fear for both of them. She stroked his comforting hand. Her fingers traced the scar she loved. Joseph, God wouldn't let this child die, or me. He needs a mother. I don't understand why all of this had to be so much more difficult than... Oh, I don't know. But there must be a reason. We just don't understand. It'll be fine. Together, we will be fine. I feel safe with you here, with me and God. Joseph was afraid to leave her long enough to beg for someone to help. All had refused so far. There was no help anyway in a place that didn't care enough to make room for a woman in labor who was left alone in a stable with animals and their smelly excrement. No help from men or angels. They were on their own, and Joseph was terrified watching his Mary in birth pain. He was surprised when his petite wife squeezed hard enough to hurt his carpenter's hand. She was soaked in sweat and panting now, exhausted and shivering. What kind of baby would God's son be? Would he be huge? Would he glow like an angel? Would he be born able to talk? That's crazy. He's a baby. What am I thinking? How will he be different, though? Or is this all some fantasy of Mary's and some stranger's child? Her screams brought him back to her needs. He loved her, but he was helpless to ease her pain. Mary was bleeding, and the bones of her hips had separated farther. Joseph had to watch the painful contractions squeeze her. They took over, out of her control. She shivered and struggled and pushed until she collapsed for a moment of rest before the hardest part began. She was not allowed to rest for too long. Her body took over and surprised her. It knew what to do. She tried to hold back, but it hurt too much to fight it. Joseph saw a look like terror in her eyes. I'm scared, Joseph. He was terrified himself. He thought he might soon be the only survivor of this night, with mother and baby both dead. But when Joseph saw his son's black hair as he crowned, he yelled to tell her. Between gasps, Mary told him his son was coming now. After this long struggle, it was over soon, once the baby's head was seen. Joseph gathered the slippery child in his arms. He caught him in his rough hands, first grayish blue, then suddenly changing to red with his first cry that brought the breath of life into his lungs. Joseph was worried about the shape of his head, still compressed from his journey into light. The baby blinked and squinted in the dim oil lamp light as the light he himself had created first touched his eyes. Light met light. Joseph thought he looked confused, bewildered by the way his world had changed. It was cold and bright and hard now. He liked it better where he had been. God's son was welcomed into this world by a stable full of animals. Their donkeys sang in his dear, awful voice. Joseph cut the cord and lay him in his mother's arms. She rested there a while before the afterbirth began to come. It was a calm moment for them to greet the new life that had joined them. His mother dried him and rubbed him with salt, then quickly wrapped her son in clean white cloth that she had woven from flax. It was the softest thing she had. His father laid the tiny king in a manger he had filled with fresh, sweet-smelling hay to cover the splinters on the side. It was the best he had. Simple gifts from poor humans to the one who owned everything. But they brought one precious gift, their love. He was born into a loving family. Jesus went to sleep while Joseph tended his wife as she delivered the afterbirth. It was surprisingly more painful than the child had been, but mercifully short. When it was done, he cleaned her, kissed her, and brought her baby back to her arms again. He would never forget the look on her face as she held her son. It was a memory that would make him smile the rest of his life. He would replay it often as he worked with wood or as he lay in that private moment before sleep took him into the world of dreams. Mary talked to her son in that language mothers always discover inside themselves when they speak their first words to their child. Mary had wrapped the baby in swaddling clothes. It was as if he was being returned to the restriction of the womb without the warmth. His arms and legs had only been free to move for a few minutes before they were bound. It was the accepted cruel comfort. First, it reminded babies of the only world they had known, and mothers were taught that if the baby were to grow tall with straight arms and legs, he needed to be wrapped into immobility. The fingers that he had not yet discovered were hidden from Jesus again. His toes would have to wait for days to be known. God was tightly bound so he couldn't move. But it reminded him of the only world he had known, the tight world where he could hardly move. He stopped crying and focused all his attention to his eyes and ears. His world was still upside down and senseless. It would take time for light to know light again. Gabriel was busy elsewhere, a few miles away above the hillside, announcing to the shepherds the wonder of the night. They left their sheep and somehow found him after checking dozens of stables looking for a baby in the feed troughs, as they were told. That night, many in Bethlehem laughed at the crazy shepherds looking for a baby in a manger. They thought there was a madness in their absurd quest. Madness with their excited tale of angels and a Messiah who would free them from the Romans and much more. Madness to believe the prophecy was real, but in such a humble way. These excited shepherds who were thought mad were the first visitors who came to worship him. They found him in a manger, as rough a throne that has ever served a king. While the shepherds gathered around his wife and the baby, Joseph took this moment to write down the words to a song that was forming in his heart. Out of the darkness, out of the silence, came the bright light and cry of life that entered the world unknowing, fragile as a whispered wing. 9 months growing in the darkness, blind and deaf, light saw and sang from fragile flesh suspended between heaven and earth, before the first breath of spirit shared returned into itself.